the history of architecture and design, there are these very special moments that are somehow reflected in a portrait, like the one behind me. And these moments are very special because they represent a new way of making in the world and a new way of seeing the world. And on the one hand, they are the result of outgrowth and shifts in technology, but on the other hand, they allow us to envision and to operate in the world and to see the world through a different lens. So, ironically or not, women building bombs in Second World War II, the assembly line that is so typical of the Industrial Revolution made perfect sense relative to what came before the assembly line. But if you take the assembly line to its apex, to its very, very edge, you get this. You get what we've seen in many presentations today, and the kind of products that we're building today, the kind of buildings that we inhabit today, and the kind of devices that we use today. These are all made of parts, right? A world of parts that are put together into assemblies. You know, the assembly line has dictated this world of parts and framed the imagination of designers and architects who were taught to think about their objects and constructs and buildings and wearables in terms of objects made of discrete parts with distinct features. And that has obviously informed the way we make those parts, the processes by which we create these products using industrial processes, as you've seen before, are also taken or given to us from this legacy of the industrial age. So at the end of the digital age, we are still operating through this legacy of the Industrial Revolution, the age of the machine, the age of assembly. And 250 years later, we are starting to witness what this has produced and what the outcome of all of this means for nature and for our natural environment. This is literally an image of nature digesting this culture of parts and a call to arms for designers and architects to rethink what it means to do design in an age that shifts, that takes us from the age of the machine to the age of the organism, from the industrial age to the biological age. But how does nature make things? And why is this so different than the way that we make things? Well, nature has two principles by which she follows. The first one is property variation. All of the objects, the constructs in nature are characterized by variable property. So if you break your foot, the doctor will tell you, walk on your foot to introduce load, and the spongy bone will densify itself according to that location of load. And the other principle is multifunctionality. Nature doesn't produce homogeneous parts that are put into assemblies, but rather nature produces constructs that are multifunctional. The skin is both a barrier and a filter, right? But architects and designers alike tend to separate between materials and their performance criteria. So I wanted to show some of our work, but first ask you what you think you're looking at on the screen. You can shout it just to the stage. I'm anyhow going to be late. Yeah, cross-section of the brain. A skull, a brain. Anything else? Any other ideas? So this object that you're seeing, I'm going to show it at the very, very last slide, but I will tell you that it's entirely designed, that nothing about it is biological, and that everything about it is biological. It has been designed voxel by voxel, and I want to say that we are entering a new age in design, which I would like to discuss today through our work, and say that I don't want to talk about it as something that exists, because it doesn't yet exist. In a way, it exists in our work, but not yet in the world. But I want to call it into existence, and I want you to come with me on this journey and to point towards what it means to take the material world, to take everything material that we create, automobiles, airplanes, buildings, cities, wearable devices, medical devices, and place them in the ecology, and consider materials and products as part of the natural ecology, a material ecology. This, of course, demands of designers not to only operate through the singular source of materiality as we know it, the table of the elements, but rather designers are called upon to mediate between two additional regimes, two additional modalities, the digital and the biological, the 2-bit worldview and the 4-base pair worldview. And this is what we do in my lab, Mediated Matter. We attempt to offer a point of view towards this new future from where we're sitting at the MIT Media Lab. We do scientific research that ends up with technological innovations, we hope, that enter design and, of course, in the context of designs of our own. Our research work lies at the intersection of 4 fields, and those 4 fields are computational design, additive manufacturing, materials engineering, and as of 2 years ago or 3 years ago, synthetic biology as well. And so you'll see some of that work enter throughout as I present the project. But what I'd like to say is I compare the relationship with nature to a relationship with a lover. You're first inspired by that entity, and the closer, the more intimate you get, you're first inspired, then you're informed, engineer, design. So I sort of am going to take you through a journey. Yeah, thank you for laughing. This confirms that it's been understood. But we start with a relationship that is a relationship of admiration and emulation, a mimicry, a word I never use, towards a relationship that begins to use these materials of nature, engineer them, to an age where we are designing nature herself, literally hacking DNA to produce products. My team follows from the aphorism of method before form. We believe that technique and expression are related. The tool you pick, the tool you build, is absolutely related to its expression, and form without formation means nothing. And so that is something that's really, really true and important for our work. I wanted to start with a helmet that was designed as part of a very large collection for Centre Pompidou several years ago. But this helmet, unlike the glasses that many of you are wearing or the chairs you're sitting on, is not made as an assembly that's put together from 2 materials or more, but rather it is a system that diffuses the elastic moduli of this, the elasticity of this particular helmet. Top view, front view, it was called Minotaur Head. It was inspired by Borges' Book of Imaginary Beings. But rather, you have 2 materials that are fused together, the black and the white, or the translucent, the hard and the soft, and they vary in the resolution of the human hair, 16-micron resolution. And why is this interesting? Because the resolution of the 3D printer, in this case, is 20 times the resolution of the scanner, which means that you can today not only design objects that would fit the geometry of the body, but rather they would fit the physiological makeup of the tissue. So you can place softer materials around stiffer tissue and stiff materials around softer or fatty tissue. So again, you're not designing the shape alone, but you're designing its materiality, and the materiality responds to the physical makeup of the body. In the same way, we designed, and many of these projects were done printed by Stratasys and in collaboration with the 3D printing company Stratasys, like this dress for the Paris Fashion Show, together with my colleague, Professor Craig Carter from the Department of Material Science. And here you're seeing the materials are fused, again, a dress with no seams, with no parts, a single system that's printed as a whole. Or this chaise to quiet the thinking mind was designed for the Dalai Lama, and designed as a kind of a fruit that varies its property to absorb sound, so increase surface area to volume, and places the soft materials around areas of pressure points. So think about what it means or feels to wear your acupuncture therapist. These same techniques that we've developed at the lab are also entering the medical design world and research. This is a portrait, and I'll show many portraits today, of my good friend and first PhD student, Stephen Keating, who fought brain cancer and successfully beat it. And Steve has been using these bitmap printing techniques, the ability to see through the section of the material, to be able to perceive what the tumor, this gigantic astrocytoma, looks like, and provide his surgeon pre-surgery three-dimensional models of his tumor. At one point in my lab, we were all printing Steve's tumors. He's well, he's healthy, and he's talking about his research in that domain, so I encourage you to look it up. All of these tools that have been developed in my lab allow us, especially when compounded, to very, very easily design those shapes and forms, not only using genetic algorithms, but also using different types of materials and that adapt and that respond to the environment. For example, these kind of models that vary the elastic moduli, vary their elasticity from 50 kilopascals to 1 gigapascal. So these hairs, for example, all have the same shape, but because they're softer in the middle, you get this different kind of behavior. These kind of principles were implemented in some of our work. Most recently, a mask that we designed for Björk, with Björk, that was actually a collection of masks that we called Rotleys, in Icelandic, skinless, or without a skin, to celebrate vulnerability in her album Volnekura. And Björk wore this mask for her show, but here the idea was, again, not to design a mask or a helmet or a wearable or a building or whatever the thing is that is made of parts, but to design it as a whole, as a single system that varies from bone-like elements to muscle-like elements, a kind of a muscle textile that is printed in a single go. We are transcending, or we're reaching near the scales of nature, often, now more often than not, transcending the scales of nature. Here you're seeing at one of our most recent models and the ability to 3D print at the resolution of a red blood cell, a nerve cell, and a sperm cell. And that is very interesting because that raises questions about the interaction of these products with the human body and with the environment. So this first video explores a project for a wearable digestive system that actually digests light and generates sugar cubes in the pockets. And here the idea was to, the vision was to generate food out of sunlight and to design objects that are three-dimensional, geometrically complex in 3 dimensions, but also allowed to contain and direct fluid media that is biological to generate sugar or to generate biofuel to fuel your scooters or to fuel and power AC, air conditioning systems, etc. So again, this material ecology notions. And the question that we asked was the following. How can we design relationships between the most primitive and the most sophisticated forms of life? So this is a first wearable technology for synthetic biology. It contains 2 microorganisms, green and yellow. The green ones are cyanobacteria. They convert light into sugar. The yellow ones live in the human gut, E. coli cells. They convert the sugar into biofuel or sucrose or other useful products. So those 2 microorganisms do not interact in nature, and they're put into a wearable for the first time in this project. So this is called a co-culture, a marriage between 2 forms of life. We design tools that allow us to computationally grow forms in order to contain them. In this particular wearable, we focused on a single line element that we can grow on top of a body that has white and orange. So the white is transparent, the orange is opaque. When it's transparent, it can take on photosynthesis. So by controlling the mechanical and optical properties of the shell, we can also control the biology that is inside it. So when you unfold the wearable, edge to edge, you get 60 meters of channel, hollow channel that contain biology. This is 10 times the length of the small intestines. It's half the length of a football field. That's a lot of volume for life. We're printing the shell and we're getting ready to store in the microorganisms. So this is what we call a speculative design project. This is not yet a product that goes to the market, but it's a way to test and to speculate and to ask questions about the future of wearable devices and also building skins that can generate energy simply by being exposed to sunlight. Because these questions are so speculative, they require new technologies such as this one, which was to 3D print with liquid support. This was the first macrofluidic device that was printed. Now I always say, first I was impressed, now I say, you know, it's still bulky, it's still stiff, and there are a lot of design edits that need to take on, but this is just a first taste of what could be. Think of these wearable digestive systems as a kind of a wearable microbiome that can take information from the outside and from your body and compute that, insert vitamins to the body, literally act as a kind of additional digestive system. So from photopolymers to natural materials, so we're moving closer to the lover, to nature, rather than simply emulating those forms, actually using natural materials and biological materials for the construction of buildings and products. Do you guys know what this is? Anyone? Someone. There's always one person who knows. Yes! Yes! You win. It's an octopus beak, and it's 100 times more compliant at its base, where it fuses with a soft tissue, which is insanely beautiful because, again, it's not an assembly. It's a continuous system that varies its stiffness, and that's exactly what we wanted to reach in building scale. So we looked at shrimp shells, and we grinded them, and we produced chitosan paste, and we achieved this range of materials that varied in mechanical and optical properties, from dark, stiff, and opaque to light, soft, and transparent. We created a robotically controlled multi-nozzle chamber that was connected to a robotic arm that allowed us to 3D print those materials, those biological, biocompatible, and biodegradable materials in one go. So we could produce building skins that were part structure, part skin. Again, no assembly, a single part that finds its shape upon contact with air, depending on the two-dimensional pattern that is printed, which is why it requires a PhD, because we have to predict the kind of three-dimensional shapes that will be generated based on the two-dimensional patterns. Laia is holding one of these components, 40 megapascals at its root, so very, very stiff. This is an image that particularly moved me because I could see in the future how these constructs could actually work as single material system construct. You can, of course, generate very useful products like Starbucks coffee cups that biodegrade in the rain when you end up using them, or very useless products like bathing suits that biodegrade when you enter the water. But this is a true material ecology, right? And it can be controlled with a bit of beeswax. So moving towards this new material ecology in design, where we can let go of plastic, we can say bye-bye 80s, let go of plastic and move towards the production of biocompatible and biodegradable products. But as an architect, I always think of what about the large scale and what about the building scale? And in order to build with these principles in larger scale, you need a material that is transparent, that is structurally sound, that's chemically inert. You need glass. Currently, we can do all this great biology in a Petri dish, but can we compute in glass? Can we design a Centre Pompidou without parts, where the circulation, heating, air conditioning, they're all contained within a single system that makes it possible to control both the spatial requirements and the environmental requirements? So, in August of 2015, we released to the world the first optically transparent 3D printer. It's a printer that prints glass. This is the first version. We're working on a second version to be released in April this year. But I wanted to talk about the first version and to show you some of our work. So here we go. All right, so the printer is actually very simple. It's a 3D printer that's connected to a kiln cartridge on top. The kiln cartridge is fed with molten glass that is then via a nozzle of, in this case, about 4 millimeter in diameter, produces this layer construction almost like toothpaste. The temperature of the printing process is 1900 Fahrenheit. This is about 1000 Celsius. The kiln temperature is 690 Fahrenheit. The printer is connected to a parametric software environment that allows us to design these glass constructs. We can connect this parametric software environment to the printer, and the software tells us how many layers, how fast, what temperature, etc. And so it's very easy to predict what kind of parameters, fabrication parameters, are required for the production of the form. So what you're seeing here is what differentiates glass printing from glass blowing. With glass blowing, the internal features are always smooth. In this case, as designers, you can control the internal and the external geometrical features. This is called structural instability. It's what happens when you pour honey on toast and it starts to autocoil. So by extending the distance between the nozzle and the base, you can generate these highly controlled autocoil structural instability patterns. First models, and through time we achieve more and more control. So these first structures printed out of glass were displayed in the Smithsonian Design Museum, and the next chapter for this work is to move from the product scale to the architectural scale. And so hopefully this April you will be able to see for the first time architectural scale glass columns. What you're seeing here are caustic patterns. This is the envelope of light rays that is reflected as you shine light through those forms. And it is very interesting to note that one can reverse engineer the process, that is, start with a shading criteria and parameters and generate the three-dimensional form as a result. Of course, the question is, how might these enter the architectural world? How can we generate new kinds of spaces and new kinds of architectural skins that can contain biological media? And that will obviously involve the introduction of new design features like color, spatial, new kind of harnessing of instabilities to turn them into design features like in interstitial spaces between layers. And of course, turning the fabrication system into a sensor, into a kind of a machine that can not only print, but can see what it is printing and can see the environment. So here, we're connecting a sensor to the end effector. Instead of a material, we're connecting a sensor. And that sensor can see the environment. So in this case, it's seeing the magnetic field around the toaster oven. And then, around the computer, or the heat distribution around the toaster. In the same way, it can see seismic loads. It can see changes in climate. And depending on those environmental constraints, it can then additively manufacture buildings on site. And that was the challenge behind the next platform, which we are currently working on, which we believe to be is the largest additive manufacturing platform on the planet. Currently, it's a hydraulic boom arm connected to an electric arm, 5 degrees of freedom plus 6 degrees of freedom, hydraulic, electrical, in total 11 degrees of freedom. And this is sort of combining long exposure photography with robotics to be able to show you the 80-foot diameter reach of the long arm in blue, and then the smaller reach of the smaller arm. So this robot can see, sense the environment, can create these volumetric light paintings, and then based on that construct a structure, a physical structure. So here it is for the first time. We haven't yet released this material. This is, we call this digital construction platforms. It can carry its own materials. It can potentially use local materials. It has solar panels, so it can use its own energy, potentially source itself, by itself completely in the future. It is pseudo-self-driving, but in the future it will be a completely self-driving platform that can be controlled from a laptop or an iPhone. In this case, you're looking at the first dome that was printed out of foam in 13.5 hours over a period of 2 days. And the foam obviously has volumetrical expansion, and you can see that in the pattern. But the material in this case is not actually what is important. What is important is that the scaling of this technology, and here Steve is pushing the button, getting it back home to the hangar just at a click of a button. And here he's using the drone to sort of show us the top view of the dome and waving hello. So imagine what kind of opportunities can be in the world of architectural design when you combine glass, when you combine data-driven material modeling, when you send these robots to, to the two poles, to extreme environments, to reclaim those environments and operate and work with local materials from the environment. I call this a kind of a digital vernacular. I wanted to end with what you've seen in the first image, the first animation, and that is the last breath. This is a project that we have just released at the London Design Museum. It's called Vespers. And the last breath was, it's such new work. I'm still wrapping my head around how to talk about it. You know, they say that in every breath that we breathe, there are molecules that were exhaled by Julius Caesar and by Jesus and by Cleopatra. The dead are very much amongst us, as much as we live amongst those spirits. And we wanted to use these techniques not only to see the environment and capture the environment, but in this case to capture a very humble performance criteria, which is the last breath of a loved one. This first project was a precursor to Vespers. It was called Lazarus because it was printed the day David Bowie passed away. And here we're combining the physiological, the biological, and the rheological, a heat map, a normal map, and a flow field to generate a death mask that is a life mask. A death mask that is designed as a kind of a biological urn, an air memento that contains the last breath of your loved one. 500 milliliters of air that are contained in this biological urn, if you will. This was what you've seen at the beginning, and it approaches, as you can see, the scale of nature herself. This precursor has led to a collection of masks, again, that is called Vespers, and if you're at the London Design Museum, please go and check it out. And these are some of the death masks that, that utilize this data-driven techniques. One day, with your help, a building. I wanted to end with a portrait by Daniel von Seidelhoff, who took all the portraits for this show, Vespers, of this wonderful man holding Lazarus, and to say that this is our time to look at ourselves and to understand that everything physical that we make, that we design, that we produce, is part of this environment. It's part of this material ecology. And the definition between culture and nature are now being blurred by these new technologies. And I, for one, am so excited to be on this journey with you.